Leaf, turn it down. You cannot turn it up. I'm going on a very important webinar. Okay, just a few moments and we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for your patience, just allowing everyone to still trickle in. It's 1 past. We're going to go ahead and get started at 2 past the hour. So thanks for your patience. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. Let's see, Lisa and Megan, maybe we're having a little bit of tech. Okay, a little bit of tech issues. Let me see if I can support here, turning our cameras on. Let's see. Let's see if that helps. We're trying to get our cameras turned on. Thank you for your patience. There we go. We have Megan. And let's see. Lisa should be able to turn her mic on, or her camera on. Thank you for your patience. And there we are, live. Thank you, team. Zoom, it seems as though it's having like regular updates, that it's really hard to keep up with all of their new security. So thank you everyone in your patience. And thank you to Zoom for keeping us all safe. So we've arrived, and thank you everyone for being here today. I am going to just start with a tiny bit of housekeeping, which is that I noticed there's a lot of stuff in the chat function. Because it's difficult for me, Bryn Coletta, as the moderator, to simultaneously talk and read the chats. I am going to not read the chats until the end. So if you could hold questions until the end, that would be extraordinarily helpful for me as the moderator and our time together. So without further ado, just give me a moment here. I'm going to close the chat so that I can be fully present and focused. Great, there we are. Okay, lovely, thank you. Welcome to the Trauma Sensitive Yoga and Mindful Practices for You as well as your students. I am today's moderator. My name is Bryn Coletta. I'm the co-founder here at Yoga Ed. And most importantly, I am joined by two of our extraordinary ed specialists. The first, Megan, if you would be willing to give a wave so everyone can locate you, Megan McWilliams. Thanks, Megan, for being here. Megan is a full-time social worker. She's from Austin, Texas, and she has spent her career in the education system, providing individual, group, and family therapy within schools. She has a dual degree, a master's degree that is, in both social work and public health from Tulane University, where she developed her passion for the mind-body connection. Aside from her colorful career in social work, she also is a certified 200-hour yoga teacher, and she hopes to bring the many benefits of yoga to her students, schools, and families. So Megan, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. And then also joined with Megan is Lisa Malinowski. Lisa is a mindfulness and yoga educator. She hails from the Crim Fitness Foundation, a nonprofit in Flint, Michigan. And as a business student at Michigan State University, Lisa was introduced to yoga while studying abroad in the Netherlands. And it was a practice that allowed her to truly feel at home in her body as well as her mind. And her love of creative movement, building connections, and holding space for meaningful gatherings guides her back to the mat with open arms and welcome community. Lisa also is a certified yoga instructor with over 1,000 hours of teaching, which brings her to her ERYT status with the Yoga Alliance. And she has spent her yoga career teaching not only to children and teens, but also adults. And she is also a social justice advocate and honors yoga through compassionate and community-centered practices that hope to be inclusive as well as accessible. So as you can see, between the years and the academics and the experience in the yoga field, we are all lucky enough to learn from Megan and Lisa today. So thank you both to being here. For those of you who this is your first time ever being at a roundtable style webinar, they're my favorite to facilitate because I feel like they're the most authentic, they're the most comfortable. So the way that this is going to happen is I am going to ask questions to both Megan and Lisa. They'll do a bit of volleying back and forth with those questions. I might contribute. And as we said at the end, it's really important for us to answer your questions. So we have put enough time to answer those questions. If you can just please hold the questions until the end, that would be extraordinarily helpful for me as both facilitator of questions and moderator of our time together. Thank you. So without further ado, Megan, I'm going to go ahead and start with you, please. And I would love to begin here. What exactly is trauma and what can cause trauma?
Thanks, Bryn. Trauma, in just a very broad statement, is a life experience or event that leaves a lasting impression on you, and it can impact the way you interact with other people, kind of shapes, it might affect your just view of the world. And some things that can cause trauma, it's very individualized. I always, like to make that a point, is that, one person can't really decide if an event is traumatic for you. It's how you've experienced that event throughout your life and how it is shaping how you interact in the world. But some examples of trauma could be shock trauma, which is a singular event in your life. And it could be, an event that has like a very concrete beginning and end, such as an accident, or witnessing a very scary experience, or a natural disaster. Those things can have lasting impacts throughout, but the event itself has a beginning and an end. There can also be ongoing and chronic stress that affects us in a traumatic way, such as chronic ongoing abuse and neglect, especially when we're talking about children. There can be medical trauma. There can be systemic trauma, such as racism and oppression in your experience and the experience of your family. And there can be a different experience of trauma in terms of generational trauma. So things that your family has experienced or the generations before you, and how that is affecting you today as a person. So there's a lot of things that can, cause trauma or traumatic symptoms in a person.
Thank you, Megan. So speaking of trauma and symptoms of trauma that people may be experiencing, especially given the current events. We're living in a pandemic and alongside a social justice movement. How might this trauma that folks have experienced look like in children and teens versus adults? And aside from the theory, would you be willing to give us an example of this?
Sure. Yeah, especially for what's going on right now, I think it's really interesting because it's an ongoing trauma, so it hasn't ended yet. So a lot of the symptoms that we might be seeing are survival, and that's where the trauma and stress response can be really adaptive to getting us through really tough times. But it's still kind of yet to be determined what will be the very long-term effects. And so kind of how we're interacting with individuals and kids and the educators who might be on the call for students now, it's keeping that lens in mind that this is something that people are still dealing with on the daily, and that what we're doing to get through each moment might be really necessary if it's not harming self or others. So for example, especially right now, our coping skills are really lacking. So the things that maybe we used to have access to that made us happy, or spending time with friends and having physical touch from other people, those things are really strained right now, which can, exacerbate or magnify any symptoms that might have already been there. So maybe you already had some baseline anxiety or depression, and now that is being maybe elevated due to the pandemic and the social justice movement that things are going on. And being sensitive to those symptoms in your students and who you're dealing with, and also with yourself. I think that's an important piece of this as well, is that we're, as educators or anyone caring for other people, are also dealing with this. So how we might be aware of things that are happening in adults is just noticing any changes and kind of honoring that you guys are experiencing this too. So changes in your daily routine, things that used to be enjoyable are not bringing you joy. Being mindful of your sleep. I think sleep is another big symptom that we can kind of track and be aware of. And if we're still feeling motivated to try to find creative outlets during this time and during these challenges, what are we motivated to do? Whether that is leaning into some of the ways that we can affect change in our world, or if we're trying to find joy again, right? So trying to find those things that bring us joy. I think that answered your question mostly, Bryn, but let me know if I didn't catch on anything.
Yeah, no, great. It overly answered the question, so thank you. And just one piece, and if you could just clearly draw this out maybe for folks listening, because you gave so many examples, would you be willing to give an example of, you had touched on stress and anxiety, and that folks may have experienced this prior, but also it may be new. Could you give an example of the response to stress and anxiety in what you might present in an adult versus how it would present in a child specifically?
Yeah, so children might not have the language for what they're feeling or experiencing right now. So that it might for them show up more in their behaviors. So it might be more tearfulness or lack of motivation, kind of just wanting to, we are all staying at home, but maybe not try to engage in the coping skills or art or dance or things that used to make them be happy and have fun. The lack of social interaction too, I think is a big piece too. So feeling isolated. There might be some more internal introspection too that's happening that can be a challenge as well. So kids, you might see more just behavioral changes, attitude changes, mood changes, and that similarly can be in adults too. Adults might have a little bit more language to express what they're feeling, and considering the fact that everyone is affected by this right now, talking about it with your friends and loved ones is really important. But you also might see, again, that kind of internalizing. So really withdrawing from people, if kind of like if there's no point in, you know, engaging, we can't go out and have fun, I'm just gonna close off and kind of shut down. And I've definitely seen that show up in some of my online therapy work too, where it was kind of low engagement, not wanting to, you know, participate, which there could be many factors involved in that, but something to kind of be mindful of as we're gathering information on how this is affecting people in the long term.
Great, thank you, Megan. That's really helpful. Lisa, how have you seen these symptoms show up in the physical classroom?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Megan, too. Yeah, so again, like Megan just kind of touched on, it's, you know, I don't know personally that that's exactly, you know, trauma that's showing up. However, speaking with social workers and engaging them in this process has been really helpful for me to identify, like, oh, okay, now I might be able to see a bit bigger picture of what's going on. So I'm not just treating it as like I see something and label it as trauma. So it's just kind of good to have context too. But for example, there's been like physical fighting that I've seen. One of the most common ones that I see is disengagement, which Megan kind of touched on there. So just a lack of interest, kind of tossing the mat to the side, rolling their eyes as instantly as soon as I walk in, and they don't know me, kind of retreating to the back of the class. And then two, on the flip side, I've seen the opposite, the attachment piece. So really needing that attention, you know, and that comes to coming right up in front of the class, talking to me during class while I'm speaking to the whole class and wanting to have a one-on-one conversation. Again, not always trauma. It just might resonate that way with that one student. Let's see, other ways. Anxiety or anxiousness could be a way to process. Sometimes it comes up in fidgeting. And so needing to feel something tactile or moving. So having that sense of awareness, even just as if you're teaching or just witnessing someone teach a yoga class to students, knowing that like some movement or swaying or fidgeting might just be their way of like holding an emotion or allowing emotion to be released or come to the surface, even though the student might not even be able to identify that they're feeling that way. Yeah, it could be that swaying that I just did, movement side to side. Falling asleep, another one Megan mentioned, tiredness in that too, which we'll get into a bit more about like boundaries around the class, but sometimes students just need a nap because if they're experiencing chronic stress or trauma, oftentimes their bodies are in overdrive. And sometimes a longer savasana or rest is just needed and welcome too.
Thank you, Lisa. That's really helpful to bring it to life in the physical presence of the classroom. Very helpful. Thank you. Megan, how have you seen this show up in the online space as a licensed social worker? I know that people are really hungry right now for like, what does this look like in online space as we're all moving into, especially as educators, the distance learning plans?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting navigating therapy and also bringing yoga tools into the online space. And it's been a challenge. A major challenge I do want to acknowledge it too is just the socioeconomic disparities that can limit people in being able to engage in online work. You know, that's a big factor that needs to be considered as well. But in terms of symptoms that I've seen show up, and again, this is all new, very new information gathering, but there was kind of like a big excitement at first for the students who did get to participate right away, because it was just very different, and you're kind of seeing into their house and they're seeing into my house, and so there was kind of like a learning together, and then I saw a very big kind of drop off of engagement, and that can also be, you know, a mirror of the stress response as well. It's kind of these big these big feelings, these energies, and then there can be a crash. And it seems kind of like now we're kind of just ebbing and flowing as we get new news and new information, and just sitting with uncertainty was such a big theme in this work. And some of the challenges that I faced to doing just online therapy at this time in particular was not having those access to a lot of those coping strategies and encouraging students to do that. So it was a challenge for me as well. And for me to kind of name and honor that, I think was important, that I have to meet the students where they are, and being able to assist them in some sort of way to kind of get through on the day-to-day. It kind of our goals kind of turned into day-to-day goals instead of maybe long-term monthly goals of, what can we do to get through this week and today? So those big shifts I saw in kind of online therapy and learning, and then in bringing yoga tools in. I almost noticed a little bit more engagement with the online. It seemed almost like there was a comfort level of like, oh, I'm not physically in front of you to, it can be vulnerable to get into some yoga poses in person. So it has depended on sort of the experience of the student and what they're comfortable with. And definitely for some of like the trauma symptoms that I've seen, like I said before, kind of that disengagement, not wanting to join in, chronic fatigue, feeling really worried and very tearful at times. One thing that was really challenging with these lack of coping strategies is monitoring suicidal ideation. That was a really big one for students who maybe already experienced that before the pandemic or before shelter in place. Again, we're being isolated, lack of, especially for our middle school and teens, where social interaction is their whole world right now. That was a really big factor, that trying to monitor and support those symptoms as well.
Thank you, Megan. I find it interesting you bring up the point of some of your students being more engaged because of feeling more comfortable. And that's something I saw just very personally from a facilitator perspective of working with so many various school districts across the nation and various schools, that I actually saw a high uptick in participation of teachers than I did from physical courses, and a lot of it leaning into that, being able to be in the comfort of their own home. So that leads to a window of excitement for those of us who are staying on distance learning plans, of potential of we may be really nervous about how can I do this, but also looking at how there could be more opportunity here with distance learning. So thank you for pointing to that. Megan and Lisa, I would love for this to be like a conversation amongst the two of you, because both of you point to this so clearly in your bios of yourself, which is the mind-body connection. And my question for the two of you is, why are mind-body resources so important to supporting trauma symptoms? And if you could specifically discuss the relationship of trauma to the body and the mind, and the opportunity to present through mind-body resources and somatic-based practices, would be really interesting here.
Megan, would you like to start? I know you were talking a lot, but I feel like you'd started off well.
Yeah, that's okay. I thought you were going to jump on for yourself, but you introduced me. That was a good strategy. Yeah, I mean, I can speak to just sort of my personal journey in sort of wanting to incorporate more yoga tools and seeing my own personal practice growth and like the personal benefit I felt from bringing yoga into my world, and sort of how I find it really works and mirrors really well and complements the therapeutic process really well is, and especially working with kids, I kind of always come back to this languaging challenge of students just not having the language. And even if they've had, if you think about infancy, 0 to 3, 0 to 5 trauma, where you're not processing information or your experiences with words because you don't have the words. And so that information goes somewhere. And there's so many great resources out there. One of my favorite books is The Body Keeps the Score, that talks about where trauma and how trauma is stored in our body. And we might all have that experience of even memories that are stored and they get brought up based on something that's happening around us. So we know that this information gets put somewhere, and finding that body awareness and just building that mind-body connection, I think, is so essential to any sort of growth. And especially in the mental health field, of being able to connect, you know, what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And students can really benefit, any students, not just students who've experienced trauma, but from these skills that help them feel empowered to listen to their body. And I feel like we do a really good job in our yoga ed classes of providing a lot of choice and empowerment. So it's not even necessarily about the physical asana or the physical experience they're having in the class, but just the experience they're getting to make a choice for themselves. And that can be a really, really powerful moment for them. And in building that self-awareness, listening to your body, being able to make a choice, and then feeling empowered in your mind. And I find that to be so powerful for students.
Yeah, I agree. And the mind-body connection, just giving them the tools to name it, to tame it. I think it's Daniel Goleman that uses that phrase. So it's just bringing like, okay, I'm feeling something in my belly, or I'm feeling something in my heart space. Like my heart is beating. Oh, what is that? Is it hunger? No. Is it nervousness? No. Is it excitement? Yeah, it's excitement. So it's just giving the like context. So that way, once we recognize it, we can then bring an attitude of curiosity, gentleness, and kindness, rather than judgment, or just, like you said, Megan, kind of like storing it or stuffing it away. Now, too, with trauma-informed practices or compassionate-informed practices, it's important that we're not, I'm not a social worker, so I'm not there to psychologize or really get down into the deep ends of like, oh, where is that trauma coming from? Let's go and really investigate it. Really, my role as a yoga educator or instructor, I see them as giving them the tools to then use and discern when it's necessary. So like Megan, as a social worker and having these tools, can bring those into both practices, whether it's yoga on the mat or kind of just therapy or counseling off the mat too, which I think is super, super powerful. And two, it doesn't just have to be a therapist. It might be a parent or someone that has a deeper relationship with the student, where the student would feel comfortable one-on-one, kind of being guided through that process of processing their deeper rooted emotions that might come up.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for pointing to and differentiating between what the potential of the work is in trauma-informed practices, and from the lens that you're approaching it, whether you're a yoga teacher, whether you're a social worker, or whether you're a counselor, is ultimately going to depend kind of the depth that you're allowed to take the practice or the healing therapy with the folks that you work with. So thank you for pointing to that. I think that's really important, especially for those of us who are educators here on the course or yoga teachers. So thank you. So Lisa, I have another question for you while we're here, which is, how does trauma-sensitive yoga support students who may be experiencing trauma? And for this, could you like break it down? How does it work?
Totally, yeah. So maybe I'll start at the more like micro level and then kind of grow into macro level the way I see it or teach it and experience it. So how does it work? It starts with, I think, building relationships is one of the, from my experience working as kind of an outsider, so I'm not employed by the schools, I'm employed by a nonprofit that has a really great relationship and connection with all the schools in the Flint community and surrounding area. So it really is my job as a yoga educator there to build deep relationships with, from building routines, comes from building consistency. So letting the students know like when to expect me, and for how long, what days, what times, and that way we can drop into a routine. And then it's also super fun just to have them like, can't wait to see you next Friday, or can't wait to see you next week on Monday, Miss Lisa. And then also to the relationship piece. So what I love too about yoga eds, just structured lessons, is that they really give context to the classes, which allows you to have time and space to check in with the students, how they're doing, maybe expanding on that. Oh, why are you feeling like a sunny day, or why are you feeling like a rainy day today? Or just simple check-ins like thumbs up, thumbs medium, thumbs down, just to gauge how the class is doing. And little acts like greeting students at the door, thanking them after class, walking them out, can create that little bit of space that you might not think you have to build those relationships. So I think it's super powerful to do that. I think boundaries are really important. So creating a safe space and also a courageous space. So safe can be like, now physical distancing is a new art to creating a safe space, but also like, what are we doing with our hands? Where are our feet? They're on our mat or maybe in our seat if we're doing something like chair yoga. So just kind of laying it out, especially younger students still trying to really learn the body awareness piece, and kind of making it playful for them to know where it's appropriate to have your hands or your feet in your spatial boundary. I think another piece that Megan might have touched on a little bit was something that's lacking during COVID and isolating is touch and nourishing touch. And some people like love, the pat on the back or just feel like you're doing great. If you have that relationship, and with trauma-informed practices as an outside provider, it's just like a no-touch policy. So there are lots of kiddos that want to give me a hug, and maybe I have a relationship with them. So it's really just smart to discern that. So I always just, when I'm training others to share these practices, it's a no-touch policy. We're not doing adjustments or modifications. We're guiding them verbally in a safe way and modeling the posture along with them. And something great that Dr. Kristen Neff does is like a self-touch. So if touch does feel nourishing to some, which for some trauma survivors it might not. So just a gentle like hand on your heart, cradling your hand or touching your cheek might be a way to incorporate that easily, or just giving yourself a big hug. Let's see. Choice space is a really big one. And Megan, you touch on this with the word empowerment too. So it's always an invitation to join on the yoga mat when a student walks into the class. I usually have options like joining yoga, or if you don't want to join yoga through movement, you're welcome to hang out in crisscross applesauce or easy posture if they're older, or if you have a journal, you can journal or read too. And usually there are students that just don't want to engage for whatever reason, and sometimes throughout the class it's easy to get them to engage midway through. The other invitation is eyes opened or closed. So I always invite, like, you're welcome to have your eyes opened throughout the whole practice, or you're welcome to soften your gaze, relax the eyes at any point, knowing that my eyes will be open to ensure that we're safe here. So eyes closed oftentimes may not feel safe to someone that has experienced trauma because it feels scary and they don't know what's coming. So just knowing that too, it's always an invitation, never required. Another practice is really getting into the body and the movement. Sometimes breath awareness and solely just focusing on the breath might not feel great for someone that has experienced trauma. So I'll give like a general example that I've experienced myself. Is breath work for me is really challenging with asthma. So just breath work for a long period of time without an option to choose what I want to focus on can be really hard. So if I'm teaching a breath, I might say, if you don't want to feel into your breath, you might just tap the ground or just touch your shoulders, touch your head, maybe take a breath, but maybe just give your head a scratch, giving them some other sensation to tap into. Again, always an option. And then more at the macro level, that building relationships, not only just me and the students, but kind of going out and building the relationships. If you're an independent contractor coming into classes, or going and building the relationships with the teachers could be a way to share trauma-informed how you're teaching it. Oftentimes what I've seen is when a teacher sees me teach, they're like, oh my gosh, the students are so excited or engaged after. I want to do that. And if they don't know all the tiny little nuances, like the eyes opened or closed, it could potentially lead to not a good outcome for our trauma survivors. So I like to just, build those relationships, and just, even if it doesn't feel, it could be a casual conversation. It doesn't have to be like this official PD if you're not necessarily like feeling very confident about it, but just getting them some tools that you might have, and tips and tools to see what would work for them. And then I like to think of it as a wraparound support too. So it's support on the mat when I'm teaching them, and then support off the mat. So if I see them in the school, like very simple, if I see them in the school and we're not doing yoga and I'm there for another reason, greeting the student, again, building that relationship. And the wraparound service too. So social workers, if they can kind of engage in these practices, whether it's just being a second guide in the class with me, or like a supervisor, even just watching if they're not certified in teaching, just observing and helping out, that's wonderful. In case something does bubble up, again, that's a total luxury, because social workers and teachers, we know schedules are absolutely insane. So it depends. On one of my schools, for example, the social worker is super involved and has gone through a lot of training with me and with additional providers too, just to ensure that we're kind of on the same page with how that's taught. So that's a lot in one answer.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It definitely paints a broad picture of the potential of the work. So thank you for that. And if we could just very quickly, because I'm feeling like I need some movement, and so I'm sure everyone joining us does. And so that's the exciting next part, is that Megan's going to share a breathing exercise with us, and Lisa's going to share with us some chair yoga postures that are trauma sensitive. But before we get there, just the last question I have to wrap it all up. And again, this can be a back and forth because both of you have such a broad range of experience. But could you both give us an idea of how trauma sensitive yoga works in your schools that you've worked in? And what I'm looking for here is, like, people often ask us at Yoga Ed, like, what can I do once I go through one of your courses? Do I teach yoga classes? Like, do I do these brain breaks? And then there's the whole question, and Megan, I know you're getting your feet wet here with, like, what does it look like in the distance learning space? Megan, do you want to start, kind of go backwards, and then we'll loop back around to you, Lisa, what it looks like in distance learning?
Yeah, I think Lisa made some really good points too. I really like the idea of kind of, in social work or psychology, we kind of call that the ecological model too, where we're kind of touching on all of the peripheral people who are influencing or interacting with the kids. And I think a lot of it comes from modeling. So if students have the opportunity to, or if teachers or other staff members have the opportunity to witness your class, if the students are okay with that, that could be great. How it worked at the school I worked at was part of my therapeutic process with students I already had relationships with. So I invited them to be a part, optional, part of like a yoga group. I've also seen it work kind of like a yoga club as well, like, which might be like an after school program or something like that. Because again, this is not just for students with trauma histories. This reaches everybody. And you might not always know who in the room has to be really nice as well as kind of making it, accessible for everyone. Other times where I've seen it sort of trickle out, again, in my experience with working in schools, is having moments in the hallway with students who are having a moment. and getting on eye level with them and practicing some of the breathing strategies that we have already practiced in our sessions. And speaking to kind of your experience, Lisa, too, I had one student who she loved Yoga Ed's bunny breath, which is just 3 quick inhales through your nose. And then it got to the point where I could see her in the hallway and just point to my nose, and she would practice. So there can be really great ways to kind of incorporate it into daily life. And that's something I always try to emphasize with any coping strategy or any resource like yoga. It's a practice. It's not something that's you only need when you're having a moment of stress or anxiety. And the more you practice it, the quicker the resource will be available to you when you really need it. And I think that's an important part as well. But Lisa might have more other experiences of how her groups have worked in her schools.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I totally echo a lot of what you just said too. So we've done, a variety of different, like we've done it after school as well. We've done during school, like lunch hours. I've seen it done during summer school. So yeah, and something Megan you said really resonated too is that like it doesn't have to be just for trauma survivors or someone that's experienced trauma. For me, when I teach yoga, and I think through Yoga Ed as well, it's trauma informed. That's kind of like a foundation there. It doesn't necessarily even have to be named trauma informed yoga class led by Lisa. But you might have it in the subheading or something if you were to market it and share it outward. But yeah, so it's just always trauma informed for me when I do lead ed. So yeah, mindful moments, little brain breaks are huge. So I've trained a lot of teachers through sharing these practices because there's only a few on our team. So that's something that really became powerful was through the yoga and teacher trainings to get our teachers to be able to have all the tools to access this. Mindful moments and brain breaks have been, I think, the most popular that I've seen and heard feedback from that creates a quick shift for the students midday, morning, afternoon before they head back out. It's just like hitting a reset button for the classroom as a whole or just for the individual, which is really nice. Something also that I think is really important is getting you can start really small. It can feel really overwhelming to do like this and start something new if you are new to it. It can be very, very small. Again, it might be organic. It doesn't have to be necessarily 9 a.m. every single day. We're doing our mindful moment with the bell or with the chime. It might be just, again, getting down eye level, checking in with a student or students throughout the day, building those relationships. It might be a minute of moving or shaking the body during transition periods from one class to the next. Yeah, so it can be really, really small, or, you know, it could be having these after school, just parent discussions. Doesn't have to be, you don't have to be an expert. We're all learning in this as teachers, as yoga instructors. We're always a forever student is the way that I look at it. So start where you're at and yeah, share it with others as you can to start the conversation.
Yeah, I think you picked I wanted to touch base on one other thing you said too about transitions and how that can be a great way to incorporate some of this work, especially as we're moving into online learning where we might not be able to see everyone's you know, what their space and what they're allowed to do in a yoga space or in their rooms or classrooms or whatever it is that they're coming to you, and they might have a lack of space. So being able to create some routine and with those transitions of a breath practice or something like that. And also I like to explain like why I've chosen the breath work. So if the students are really active or if they're really lethargic and tired, I will name that and say, I see we might need to get up and move around a little bit so that they can kind of build that self-awareness too. And it gives like a rationale. It's not just, oh, we have to do the breathing practice because it's on the lesson plan. It's like there's a purpose, there's a reason behind it. I think that can be helpful too for self-awareness and also buy-in as well. And also modeling as the teacher, saying, I need a breath. This is, I think that's a great way to incorporate it too, for students to see that in their teachers.
Thanks,
Oh, and then
Megan.
yeah. Did you want me to talk about online yoga and kind of how that's being incorporated?
Yeah, if you could just give us like 1 minute of online, that would be really helpful, I think, for folks to like get a kind of an idea of what that looks like.
Yeah, so we've had the opportunity to partner with a great school in Hawaii that's invited us into their summer programming. So they're getting, about an hour in the morning of English language arts. They have a yoga break, yoga mindfulness break, and that's something I've been helping facilitate. And then they go to a class after that. So it's kind of that in-between time. It's mostly chair yoga as we're getting, incorporating what the needs and what the students want. But that's how it's been working so far. It's been fun. It's kind of hard to tell how everybody's participating, but again, everything's invitational anyway. So as long as they're present, it's great.
Just because they're not doing doesn't mean they're not learning, right? I think that's always been a great lesson for me. And I love that it wrapped back around to also just the value and the practice for educators, for social workers, counselors that's here. Oftentimes we think we're coming to maybe get a course or a training or an understanding from a webinar of how these practices support, trauma-informed practices support children or teens. And then we ourselves begin to practice, we ourselves begin to feel that differentiator of mind, body, and the connection, and experience the benefits ourself, which is then when the practice becomes extraordinary. And I know Megan and Lisa, both of you have worked in school environments where you've seen an embodiment happen school-wide. So not just you're going in and teaching the children and teens, but teachers have a practice, administrators are supportive, have a practice. And that's when we really see like the systemic change, right? A whole school becomes trauma-informed, which is a really beautiful process to witness. So with that, I think that we all would love a little bit of breath and movement ourselves. So Megan, because of time, I'm going to ask that you share a breathing exercise, and Lisa, I'm going to ask that you share about like 2 to 3 yoga poses. And what's important to note about these yoga poses and these breathing exercises is they all are trauma sensitive. And following this workshop, we do have a really fantastic toolkit that was created. So you don't need to take down notes. The biggest, most important thing here is that you actually are in your chair and practicing with Megan and Lisa, and know that after this webinar, we will send you an email along, not only with the recording, I've seen that question come through a lot, but also with the toolkit. So you can have this as a resource for yourself, as well as for the students that you work with. So I'm gonna go ahead and mute, and Megan, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Sure, so we're going to practice ocean breath. We're gonna practice this 3 times. And ocean breath is a nice deep inhale through your nose if you can, and a nice deep exhale out through your mouth if you can, making the sound of the ocean like, okay? We'll also add some arm movement. So on our inhales, we'll bring our arms up, and our exhales, we'll bring them through our heart. Okay, so we'll do this 3 times. You can find a comfortable seat. If you can, bring 2 feet touching on the floor, that's great. Hands can start just in your lap or by your side. Your eyes can come down to a soft gaze. You're welcome to close them if you like. So inhale, arms up. Exhale out through your mouth. 2 more times. Inhale up, gaze can follow. Exhale out through your mouth. Last one. Inhale up. Exhale out. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. And again, that was ocean breath, with a little bit of what we like to call sunshine arms for your summer break. Thanks, Megan. Lisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. So we'll just continue with some arm movement and breath awareness. So we're going to inhale, reach our arms up and around the sky. And then take your left hand in your right hand, I'm mirroring you, and go ahead and lean over to your right. And then inhale, coming back through center. And just changing sides, going the opposite way, whatever way you went before. And then inhale, coming back through center, reaching up, unwind the palms, then gently go ahead and reach the palms down and around by the sides, kind of slowly. And then go ahead this time, just taking one hand, it doesn't matter which, we'll get both sides. Raise it up and then cross it over to the opposite knee. And then swim one hand, the opposite hand behind you, and just turning the heart open. So sitting up nice and tall, feet planted, feeling where your feet land. Maybe you just take a breath in. Maybe as you exhale, you turn your chin over to look past the shoulder, so looking back. And then gently inhaling, coming back through center, reach the palms up and around the sky. And this time just twisting the opposite way, so taking opposite hand, crossing it over and down on that knee, and then swimming that arm back behind you to the chair, sitting up nice and tall, and really planting through those feet. So our hips are forward and we're just lightly turning our heart open. Maybe on an inhale, sitting up just a bit taller. Maybe on an exhale, gently turning the chin to look back. Inhaling, coming back through center, reach the palms up and around the sky, nice and slowly. And then exhale, just bringing the palms down in front of you to land on your knees or your lap. And like a string is pulling our heart upwards, just reaching the heart towards the sky. You might feel comfortable to turn the chin up, or you can keep the chin forward. Just kind of creating some space, feeling into the low back. And then exhale, gently coming back through center, easy pose, nice long, tall spine.
Lovely. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Megan, for that practice. We're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. Two places that you can place questions. You can put it in the chat box or you can put it in the Q&A. Please note that we have about 8 minutes for questions. If we aren't able to get to all of your questions, please don't hesitate from placing them in the chat box. We go through the chat box, we put them into a Word document, and Lisa, Megan, and myself go through all of the questions and make sure to thoroughly answer them. They get sent to you in an email along with the recording of the webinar and the toolkit that I promised you about. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for chat. And just give me one moment, please. Okay, so I have a question from Elena, and she says, I'm a school psychologist and want to know how to incorporate into practice, either for me or teachers, and she puts in parentheses, question mark, training. Is there anything we can do to implement, or would our school contract with you guys to have you to come in to provide services? So I'm going to go first, and then Megan, I just think it's that it would be nice for you to talk from the school psychologist perspective, which is that, yes, of course, Yoga Ed can support, and we're more than happy. We do training. I'll share a little bit about our training at the end. If you're able to stay on, you'll get an email about it after. We work with districts and do training. That's a possibility. But I think it's important that our deepest mission is that everybody receives this work, and so it may or may not be through Yoga Ed. So can you more broadly speak to this, Megan, just about what it would look like to incorporate at a school level from a psychologist perspective?
Yeah, well, the first thing that came to my mind for school psychologists is I know you guys do a ton of testing, exhaustive testing with students. So some of this breath work or just some of these movement breaks with a little more structure to them could be, I think, really helpful for when you're testing students. And I'm not sure how that will look like in an online format, but again, that can be a great way to build connection and relationship. And then in supporting the teachers as well, I find sometimes the best ways to come in as like, this is a resource for you as well. I think that can be a really great way to get the teachers to buy in, because if you don't have the buy-in, if you don't necessarily think that this is helpful, it's going to be hard to bring that to your students.
Great, thank you, Megan. Lisa, this may be a question for you. Megan, feel free to jump in, but Lisa, I know this is very personal for you as well, which Renee asked the question, just curious about the breath work with students with COVID and the asthma and bronchitis. Would you be willing to speak to that?
Totally. Yeah, I think, yeah, with the COVID, that's a new added layer. So, I don't have experience yet teaching like with mask on, for example. So I'm not gathering in person with people and teaching yet. So I won't speak to that necessarily, but folks with like bronchitis and or asthma, or just trauma with trouble breathing. I tread lightly on the breath work. So it's always, again, that invitation and noticing the breath. If it doesn't feel great to focus on it, letting your breath go like that. So sometimes the audible breath versus just the like quieter breath or still breath can help us bring some aliveness to it and help us welcome it. I've heard from the flip side from a social worker that I work really close with that like the breath work she believes is really important to the process of healing and working, how do I use the term healing? Working with trauma, working through trauma. And I think it comes with creating that safe space. So if I've never met a student and, for example, they have trauma and I know that, I probably wouldn't just drop into like 10 minutes of breath work with them and then, let them go. And that's their class. I want to develop that trust and that relationship, that safe physical environment for them to feel safe, to be able to focus on their breath. And it might just be a variety of breaths. So like Megan mentioned, one student really liked the bunny breath. It might be really great for some students. One student might not. So offering, once you kind of learn the breaths, a variety and trying it out and checking in with the student constantly. With someone with bronchitis or asthma or allergies even, it might vary from day to day or season to season. So again, just that constant check-in. What do you notice? How's it feeling? Do you want to try something else?
Great, thank you, Lisa. I have another question, and Megan, I think this might be interesting for you. I know that you and I and Julia just engaged in a conversation, and Lisa, you may have been there too, so it might be a volley, and we're gonna end with this question, but please put all the questions in and we will answer them, which is, I wanna say, and apologies if I don't get the name exactly right, and I wanna say it's Begonia. And she says, I work with pre-K children with trauma and we meditate on a daily basis. Should I incorporate yoga to meditation, or you recommend to do one at a time?
Well, I guess you could argue too that there is a meditative part of movement. So, there is some overlap there. But I do think if you kind of have a good routine going with your students, this can be a really great complement to what you're already doing. And, meditation, kind of depending on what it looks like with preschoolers, I'd be very interested in how that's going. I think it could be a good complement if you've already kind of have those systems in place. I think that can be the best way to introduce something new. Is like, this is a complement. This is just another way of processing this information through movement with breath.
Perfect. Yeah. Lisa, do you want to add?
Sure. Yeah. From my experience working with preschoolers, they're not very still. So just, and that's totally normal. It's normal for adults not to be still during meditation. So, two, there's like this misconception that we have to be still while we meditate. And like Megan mentioned, meditation, there's an element to it for many different things. It might be seated and in cross-legged, easy pose, or it might be that movement piece of that mind-body connection as you move and breathe. That might feel like meditation. It might be physical activity or exercise like running. So yeah, it really does depend, like what do you define as meditation? Something, if you don't have room for a lot of like physical movement, but you'd like to incorporate some type of movement into that seated meditation, again, like a gentle rock might work, or just some of those sunshine arms, ocean breaths, or just the art of like tapping whether it's just tapping her body or tapping her fingertips. I love this one.
So good. So good. It's a nice, thank you for leaving us with that, Lisa. It's the reminder of the simpleness, right? Sometimes we get so cognitive about these approaches, and when we just simply land back in the body. Thank you. So Megan, Lisa, it's been a great pleasure to spend the last hour with you. I know that time is the most valuable thing that we all have, so I greatly appreciate everybody who spent the time with us, certainly Megan and Lisa for your knowledge. Before we go, I'm going to do a quick share screen because it would be remiss of me not to share with all of the attendees on this course about the great opportunity to learn with Megan and Lisa. As you can see, they're extraordinarily talented. They bring a wide range of experience to our courses, and they inform our trauma-informed yoga for youth course. So just give me a moment while I drop in here and share with you. So if you're interested, there were a bit of questions in the Q&A. We do have a RCYT certificate program that has a trauma-informed focus. In this course, you will get all 3 of our mat yoga courses, the Teaching Children's Yoga, the Teaching Teens Yoga, and the Trauma-Informed Yoga for Youth. Another program that we have is you can take those all individually, and we also have a course that Lisa also leads, which is our chair yoga and mindfulness practices for children. So together we have a combined over 20 years of experience between Lisa and Megan, as well as Jason Batang and Harmony Tesoro. And all of our courses come with not only our evidence-based manuals, but also our pre-made lesson plans for going ahead and getting your start. So for you, by being on this webinar, if you're interested in any of those courses or an individual course, as I said, sign up by 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time this Sunday, June 28th, and use the code SUMMER for $50 off. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to myself, Megan, Lisa. Info@YogaEd is the great place to email us, and info will send it either to Lisa, Megan, or myself if you have specific questions for us. As always, you can visit us at our website, yogaed.com. I always say don't miss out on our resources page. That's a great place to get your start with our work. There's a tremendous amount of downloadable toolkits, white papers, and case studies if you're interested to explore more about our work. So thank you, everyone. And as a reminder, we will be sending you a follow-up email with the recording to this, the toolkit, as well as answers to all of those questions that, thank you, I still see coming through the Q&A. Thank you, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Be well.
Bye, thank
you.
Thank you.